Well, that feels weird because everybody knows me, but I'm Elizabeth. Um, so I've been probably in the marketing communications for over 20 years now. GovCon for probably 6 or 7. This particular concept that I'm a little nervous to go over this concept because I've always put this concept in front of, used it as a tool to help non-marketers or up and coming marketers understand the landscape. So I've used this concept in, well, and I use it as a tool actually today in my everyday work, particularly helping to explain the marketing landscape to the non-marketers of the company. But I developed it in the effort of trying to explain the marketing landscape to students, to undergrad marketing students, and then to small to medium-sized businesses that I would consult with. So I'll just jump in. So, oh, that didn't, okay, just a sec. There we go. So before I go into like really what the concept is, and I have this slide popped in there a second time, but kind of some of the things that this way of organizing your landscape does is it helps to organize and keep separate your distribution nodes from your content, from your tech deck tools. I think when you're looking at all of one of the things that I was often addressing was this, like, there's so much out there, we don't know where it fits, and like, what do we do? And there's this squirrel effect, and there really is a lot out there. But kind of understanding that there's a landscape and you just need to make the right decisions, and really there's almost an equation that you can get really creative with, but seeing how your distribution is different from your content, which is different from your tech deck tools, I think is important. This concept helps prioritize your efforts. Again, it avoids that option paralysis that, like, oh my gosh, I have to do everything, because you don't have to do everything, and you shouldn't actually. It keeps focus on your target, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. It helps to support data-based decision, and really part of that is if you are organized, if you have kind of things where they belong, and it kind of goes back to like, if we know the difference between distribution node and content and tech deck, then we can start to get better at understanding where our problem areas are, and knowing that, just because something is on, like, we have something on Instagram, is it Instagram? Like, is it the distribution node, or is it the content? Is it, so kind of being able to separate all of those helps you to do better analytics of your issues. And then it supports marketing agility. So part of the concept is maintaining an inventory of what belongs in your own rope. And when you're able to do that, then you're able to know very quickly, like, what can we execute on now? So something comes up, we have to communicate on something. What is in our existing rope inventory that allows us, that we can execute on now? So very simply, rented, owned, paid, and earned. So your rented space is, Chris, what a lot of people think of is shared space. But the reason that I put it in rented is because when you're in social space, or really any platform that you do not own, that you're not the owner of, all of that is algorithmically based, which means, like, you have a landlord and they can change the rules whenever they want. And so you can build this whole strategy around this rented space, which I find a lot of small businesses do. They build their entire marketing strategy on rented space. And then when the algorithm changes for reason A, B, or C, it flips everything. So I call it rented space because it's space that you need to live in, but it helps just keep into perspective the level of manageability you have on that space. Your owned space is primarily your website, anything that you have optimal manageability of. And I'm very careful to even owned space. It fits really well in the acronym, but owned space implies a lot of control. And I think one of the really important things to remember about any marketing is the idea of control should be like you want to try and manage. Your ability to control is always going to be minimal. But your website, assuming you own the domain, your email marketing list, not necessarily the tool that you leverage. So that would be, tech deck, but your actual list of people. And then if we think about this, not just from a digital perspective, but also a traditional perspective, this is like your brick and mortar, anywhere, again, where you have the most manageability of what that impression looks like. And what that engagement with the customer might look like. Your paid is your advertising, which the other thing that can belong in paid are things like your paid SEO. So there are certain things that might belong in multiple spaces. So your organic SEO, that's activity that belongs in owned space. Your paid SEO is activity that belongs in paid space. You might have, in terms of the distribution node, you might have something that exists in multiple spaces. So social media, as an example, like when I originally created this, social advertising was not nearly as prominent. And so social media was really easy to fit like very squarely in rented space. Well, now you have kind of multiple activities. You have your organic activity, which fits in rented space, and then potentially your advertising activity, which would put any social platform potentially in both rented and paid. And then your earned space would be your PR, or really anything. The way that I would tell students to think about this is any activity that there's a gatekeeper to another person's audience. So for the traditional way of thinking about that is public relations. But there's a lot of different ways for people. But there's a lot of different ways for people to think about that. Some non-digital ways that we might leverage earned space are taking advantage of speaking engagements, being a guest on a podcast, which actually would be digital, but kind of different things like that, where
Did she freeze or did I freeze?
I was just about to ask that.
It's so funny. I was like, damn, I lost him.
Elizabeth, if you can still hear us, you're frozen a bit.
She was having problems connecting earlier.
Oh, no.
Okay, let's see if she can pop
She's
back in.
creating anticipation because this is a topic I know nothing about and I'm very interested in.
And
maybe it was a strategic pause.
And this graphic has me nervous. It looks like the rope's going to break, right?
Mm-hmm.
In drama, it's called a dramatic pause. When I was running a bar, I would call it the redneck dramatic pause. You get a drunk sitting across from you at the bar and they start a sentence and then they lean forward and stare at you for about a minute and then they finish their sentence. By then you've forgotten what they were talking about and it didn't make sense anyway.
Oh, what a bummer. Hope she can get back in.
You think about how far away she is to boot. It's
Yes.
amazing. You can get this content from all over.
And God bless her, how early she gets up.
Oh
Mhm.
God, yeah, it's like 5.
When I cut up, talking. I just
Sorry.
asked
We do, and we're engaged. You were finishing up the 4 quadrants of the rope, and I think you were about to go to the next slide.
Okay, let me pull this back up. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I don't, yeah, it just disconnected, I guess. Did I talk about the critical relationship amongst the 4?
I'm not sure. Janet, you want to hit record again?
I did.
Okay,
Okay.
great.
Well, I'll just real quick, I'll address that critical relationship. So the critical relationship amongst the 4 is that everything needs to point to your own. Whether it's driving traffic to a brick and mortar or driving traffic to a website, you know, it seems straightforward, or it seems like a no-brainer, but I can't tell you how many times, particularly in consulting with small and medium-sized businesses, the number of times that you see content in any of these spaces that are just there for the sake of like, we got a lot of impressions or we got a lot of likes, and it's like, okay, but is that driving traffic to your own space engagements where you have the most possible manageability? So it in a way, it becomes that reminder that, like, hey, most of your content should really, if not all, should have a clear call to action, and that call to action should be driving to a place where you can have a conversion. Okay. So then, I mean, we can really, and I'm not going to belabor the analogy too much, but you can take that rope and then you can put it on a bridge. So one of the things that I would tell my students is, you think about your distribution nodes, and you think about making sure that that makes a strong rope, and you want that to be a strong rope so that that rope is trustworthy. It becomes this part of this relationship, that if you don't have a strong 4-pronged rope, like, people aren't going to cross that bridge. So it's important that you have quality, that your distribution nodes make sense. When we kind of think about the bridge as that customer journey, we want to make sure that there's touch points along the whole way, that there's nowhere that the bridge just completely breaks. And then I would always talk about those wood slats as the content. So you have this distribution node equation, and you need to make sure then you also have solid content that's taking you all the way. And the other reason that I really love the rope bridge concept is we can take that rope bridge from side to side, and we can pair that against the more academic tools like customer journey mapping, because we can see, customers on one side of bridge, customer makes it to the other side of bridge. But what's really cool about a good rope bridge is if you put it on the end, it really puts into perspective who you want to cross your bridge. And it really allows you to focus on your target. And really, a company may have multiple rope bridges, right? Because if you're focused on a quality target, then the rope bridge that works for one target is perhaps a different rope bridge that works for another target. Some of your distribution nodes are going to need to be different. Some of your content is going to need to be different. Even some of your tech deck is going to need to be different. And then two, when you're thinking about this kind of bridge being what your customer has to cross, it really puts into perspective the again, that trust and that relationship that's required. Like if you know that you're asking your customer to cross this bridge, then all of that content better be good. All of those distribution nodes better be good, because if they fall, they're not coming back. So then practically, what does this mean? So this is just an example of a very simple rope bridge inventory. And this is kind of where I'm gonna end off. But what I do, and I couldn't find it this morning, but what I used to have is kind of this really, really full and robust rope bridge inventory that I would kind of put in front of my students and potential and customers, and be like, these are all the possible things. But now we're going to make our landscape, and we're going to decide what belongs in our inventory today. So for this company, in their rented space, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Facebook, and YouTube, those were their focuses. Now we can evaluate things down the road, but in terms of your own inventory, the only things that should be in this specific inventory are the things that you can execute today. You can add to this inventory, you can take away from this inventory. But what makes this tool, what allows this tool to support agility, is if you always know in a snapshot what you can execute today, that's what becomes really critical. So, website, surveying, email marketing all became part of owned space. This particular, I initially created this just for digital. I started to develop it to evaluate traditional spaces as well. And I'm not going to overly go into this, but one of the ways I used this at one company is every single time we started a campaign, we would take our content pieces and we had a couple, there were little check boxes next to things. And it was like, okay, so this campaign is going to highly leverage checkbox, checkbox, checkbox. This content leverages checkbox, checkbox, checkbox. And it became the starting point for building the campaign plan and how each content piece filled in. And then when you look at your inventory, you can very easily see in a snapshot, like, okay, do I have a weak point? So like in this one, in paid space, when there's no tools or resources available to be actually executing on your paid space, like that's a weak point. Like we're missing a tech deck piece, or we're missing an ad agency, like a contractor, somebody that can support that activity. If we're building a campaign and we have 0 check marks in earned space, like, well, then we're missing out on an opportunity to be driving traffic to owned space, because earned space activity is one of the areas where you can establish the most trust. So, each one of these spaces has things that they're good at. And if we want a strong rope, we really, very few cases where we wouldn't want to have some activity in each of them. If we don't have anything planned for our own space, but we have all of this, if we're building a campaign and we don't have alignment on our website, or we're just driving traffic to our website without alignment to the visual campaign, to the content, we have some problems. So there's about 1 million ways that we can evaluate and look at and take this inventory to be like, okay, where are our issues? What's the problem? Is it content? Is it distribution node? Is it tech deck? For different companies, I've built out metrics more or less. But again, the idea is we shouldn't have to go through the thought process every single time of like, okay, what do we want to measure? We should just know, what can we measure? Now, if you have a true analytics person on staff, then they're going to be able to take those metrics and KPIs and potentially dig deeper. But if you're a small business or a medium-sized business or a large business with a tiny team, you know, being able to go through these thoughts in advance instead of on the journey are really helpful. So, oh, I did just bring this slide back just to make sure I explained how it helps each of these. Of course, we saw how organizing in this way helps to make sure that we know the difference between our distribution nodes and our content and our tech deck tools. And a lot of like new fun technology is really where this becomes important. So like, how does AI fit into our landscape? Or, you know, is it a tech deck tool? Does it get incorporated into actual activity? You know, augmented reality, VR, like all of those technologies, by being able to divide our landscape, can really help us process through where those fit or don't belong in our inventory for that target audience today. Maybe they do in the future. Of course, it helps prioritize efforts, not only from the perspective of distribution, but also from the perspective of making sure that we're driving that critical relationship of driving to owned. When you know you don't have to do everything, when you know what's in your inventory and that inventory is evaluated and updated continually, you can avoid option paralysis. When we look at that rope bridge, we're always very hyper-focused on our target. And of course, if you're hyper-focused on your target, then your content's going to be better and your decision-making is going to be better. And we saw how it helps database decision-making. And by virtue of having your inventory and going through that process and planning up front, it supports marketing agility. And I think that's all I have.